John, we heard from the Vice President earlier with comments, strong comments related to the vandalism and the protests that we saw yesterday. We haven't heard yet from the President or from the White House at large. Do you condemn what you saw yesterday? How do you characterize the protests, including what we saw at Union Station?
Well, we did put out a statement last night from the White House, but absolutely condemn any violence in protest activity. I mean, it's a First Amendment right to peacefully protest. We fully support that. We know that there are strong views about what's going on in Gaza, and some of those views are in opposition to some of the policies that we're pursuing. We get it. That's democracy. But when it turns violent, and when you burn an American flag and pull it down off a U.S. government site, that's just absolutely unacceptable. And obviously we condemn all that.
Are these protests pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, anti-Israel? How do you characterize what we're seeing?
I think it's a little bit of all those things. I mean, I can't speak for the protesters. Obviously, I don't share their views. But obviously they took great exception to the Prime Minister speaking on Capitol Hill. And as I said, many of them have taken exception with our policies with respect to Gaza.
Today we heard from one of the family members who's going to be meeting with both the Prime Minister and the President a short time from now, Aviva Siegel. She was a former hostage of Hamas. She says, I want to ask President Biden if Bibi is not able or willing to agree to the ceasefire and hostage deal to bring the Americans home. Is there anything more that President Biden is prepared to do unilaterally to try to bring those hostages home?
I wouldn't get into hypothesizing and speculating about options one way or the other. We want to get all the hostages home, clearly the Americans in particular. And that's why this deal is so important, Peter. And we are close. We are closer now, we believe, than we've been before. The gaps are closable, no question about that. And we believe, the President believes, that getting that hostage deal in place, getting that 6-week ceasefire, that's the best way to get all these loved ones back with their families.
Thank you, Kareem. Thanks, John. Did the U.S. find any of Netanyahu's remarks yesterday to be false or misleading?
I'm not going to parse everything he said or do a fact check here from this podium. He should speak for himself about what his views are.
He should, but he had a powerful stage, a joint address before Congress. Do you agree with assertions that Iran financially backs some of the protesters? That if there are Palestinians in Gaza who aren't getting enough food, it's not because Israel is blocking it, as two examples?
So on the first example, we've said ourselves, the Director of National Intelligence came out publicly and said that we do know that Iran has been funding and encouraging some of the protest activity here in the United States. Some of it. We do not believe that all the protest activity out there on a daily basis is being fully funded by Iran. There's a lot of organic concern out there in the American people about what's going on in the Middle East, and most of these protests are formed and fashioned in that regard. On the second question, there has been a steady increase of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza. The problem isn't getting it to Gaza right now. The problem is getting it around Gaza. And one of the reasons why it's so dang difficult to move things around inside Gaza is because there's a war going on and bombs are dropping. And regrettably, in the conduct of some of their recent operations, the Israeli military has, in fact, not on purpose, we have no reason to believe they did this deliberately, but there has been accidental strikes on some of the trucks and the convoys that have been moving around. So it's not one or the other. There's a lot of reasons why it's not moving around, and some of that is, of course, the military activity of the Israelis inside Gaza.
And then, now that the Vice President is the likely Democratic nominee, has she communicated with the President whether a Harris administration's Israel policy would be the same or different as his?
You would have to talk to the Vice President's office and the campaign for that. I would just, before I leave that though, just want to remind, she's been a full partner in our policies in the Middle East, particularly with our policies towards Israel and the war in Gaza, a full partner, been involved in nearly every conversation that the President has had with the Prime Minister, and very much engaged throughout.
Okay, before I get to my questions, can I just a quick follow-up on that? Can you explain to the American people who might think it just looks odd that she is having her own private meeting with the Prime Minister separate from the President's? that suggests that they aren't speaking with one voice.
I reckon if she was here, she'd be in the room right now, but she's not physically here. There's nothing unusual about that. And Vice President has, and I fully expect over the next 6 months will continue to have meetings of her own with foreign leaders. She's met privately with President Zelensky as well and others.
It was 20 days ago that the administration first said that they were really optimistic about finding, really closing the deal. Has nothing changed in 20 days? Is that still where we are?
I wouldn't say nothing's changed.
What are the remaining gaps? What are the sticking points?
And I'm not going to negotiate in public. I wouldn't say nothing's changed. I mean, there's the last 20 days that you talk about, and we've been working really, really hard to try to get those gaps closed. There's still more work to be done. But we believe, as I said earlier, we're closer now than we've been before, and we think it's absolutely achievable to get this over the finish line.
Sort of following up on Weij's point, there's one other thing that the Prime Minister said yesterday that's getting a lot of attention is that the conflict has had one of the lowest ratios of combatant to non-combatant casualties in the history of urban warfare. Obviously, our own State Department has found it reasonable to assess that the Israelis' actions at times have been inconsistent with international law. So who is correct here? And is the United States comfortable with the ratio of deaths between
Again,
combatants?
I'm not going to go line by line through the Prime Minister's speech and debate it here from the White House podium. He should speak for his comments. He should speak for his views. What I can do is speak for ours. And the right number of civilian casualties is 0. And there has been too many civilian casualties in this fighting in Gaza. And as I just indicated in my previous answer, there continue to be civilian casualties in this war in Gaza. There continues to be desperate need for food, water, medicine, because it's a combat zone in many places. And we need to bring the war to an end. And one of the principal things that the president's going to talk to the Prime Minister about today is how we get there. How do we end this war? And the best way, in his view, is to get this deal in place. Get a 6-week ceasefire. Get phase 1 going so you negotiate to phase 2. Get a cessation of hostilities, and more critically, get those hostages home.
Thanks, Karine. Thanks, Admiral. You mentioned in your topper the word compromises. Does the President believe that, specifically, that Prime Minister Netanyahu needs to make compromises to achieve a ceasefire deal? And it's not just Hamas. And also, what are those compromises that Netanyahu would have to make? If so?
Both sides have to make compromises, and because we still have gaps that haven't been closed, I think you can surmise from that there are still compromises that need to be made. The Israelis already have made many compromises to get us to this point. Hamas, through their interlocutors, have made compromises to get us to this point, and yet we're still not there. So there's still a need for compromise.
And will the President be saying to Prime Minister Netanyahu, you need to make compromises?
Well, we're going to do a readout, and we'll tell you how the meeting went after it's over. But as I said in the opening statement, this will be a prime topic of discussion, that it's time now to get these compromises in place. It's time now to get the negotiation in place and get the hostages home. It's time to end the war.
Thank you. How does the administration reconcile the comments that the president has made about the fact that Hamas has been decimated, its military objectives achieved, as he said some weeks ago, and the fact that we heard the prime minister again reiterate that he wants total victory? How do you all reconcile those two visions?
I don't think they need to be reconciled. I think both things can be true. We do believe that from a military perspective, Hamas has been very, very badly beaten and denigrated. No question about that. Doesn't mean they've been eliminated. They still have leadership in place. They still can direct operations. They still have fighters at their beck and call, and we're seeing that every day. And we also still believe that they need to be defeated, that the threat to Israel needs to be eliminated from Hamas, and that whatever the post-war situation looks like, it can't end with Hamas being in control over Gaza. So I don't think that the two things are necessarily irreconcilable or at odds with one another.